Mr. President, given that this is your last session of the Council, let me be frank. However, we are always frank, and it turns out that you have only told us about it today, as you have just told us. If the United States had not supported the coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014, had not sponsored it, had not turned Ukraine into anti-Russia, and had not allowed the Kiev regime to sabotage the Minsk agreements, as openly expressed by those politicians who were supposed to be guarantors of its implementation, there would have been no war at all. Just as there would have been no Crimea if the Kiev authorities, who came to power as a result of the coup in Kiev, had respected the rights of all its citizens and had not marched on them with weapons, carrying out the so-called anti-terrorist operation with the help of the Ukrainian army, which, by the way, is prohibited by the Ukrainian constitution.
Mr. President,
even in the few days that have passed since our last meeting on Ukraine on December 16th, the trends in the development of the Ukrainian crisis that we outlined at it have become even clearer. They can be summarized as follows. On the one hand, the U.S. administration, which lost the elections, is feverishly trying to use the remaining funds to help Ukraine. At the same time, the actions of American politicians, lame ducks, completely contradict the course proclaimed by the elected President of the United States, who takes office exactly a month later, on January 20th. On the other hand, the overdue Ukrainian president, who is suffering catastrophic setbacks on the battlefield, is doing everything to disrupt any peace initiatives and provoke Russia into a radical escalation of the conflict. In recent days, the former Ukrainian comedian has managed to take at least 3 steps in the opposite direction from the search for a peaceful solution to the conflict. On December 18th, by order of the Kyiv regime, the head of the Radiation, Chemical and Biological Defense Forces, Igor Anatolyevich Kirillov, and his assistant were killed in Moscow as a result of the detonation of an explosive device. The next day, the perpetrator of the terrorist attack was detained. He confirmed that he was recruited by the Ukrainian Special Services. This crime fully confirms the misanthropic and terrorist nature of the current Ukrainian leadership. At the same time, the accomplices of this and similar crimes directed against representatives of the Russian military, creative and political elite are Kiev's Western curators, who are hypocritically trying to ignore them, thereby sacrificing the principles that they otherwise promote in the international arena. In this regard, it is worth mentioning that General Igor Kirillov has repeatedly provided evidence of Washington's military biological activities in Ukraine. We have every reason to believe that biological weapons were developed in these closed U.S. biological laboratories located around the world. We would like to assure Kiev's American puppeteers that our investigations will not stop with the death of Igor Kirillov. It is important to bring to light those who conducted inhumane experiments on Ukrainians and endangered the entire region. The second clear step in favor of escalation was made by the leader of the Kiev junta yesterday by authorizing another shelling of targets deep in Russia with Western long-range weapons. On December 18th, ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles struck one of the objects in the Rostov region. All missiles were destroyed by the Russian air defense system. One, deviated from the course, damaged the technical structure. Delivering this blow, the Kyiv regime knew that such actions would inevitably be met with a response. And it followed on the night of today. A group strike was carried out with high-precision long-range weapons on the command post of the SBU, the Kiev Design Bureau Luch, which was engaged in missile development, as well as the nearby anti-aircraft missile system Patriot. The goals of the strike were achieved. All objects were hit, according to available data. Several high-ranking employees of the SBU were eliminated. Finally, the third unequivocal step of the Kiev regime towards escalation is a massive missile attack on the peaceful city of Rilsk in the Kursk region, carried out this afternoon local time from the HIMARS MLRS. The targets of this attack were a local cultural center, a stadium, a pedagogical college, a school, and a fire station. As of this moment, 6 people were killed, including 1 child. 10 victims are in hospitals. As you understand, our response to this deliberate crime against Russian civilians will not be long in coming. By acting in this way, Zelensky ignores the interests and opinions of his citizens, a significant number of whom today oppose new escalatory steps that lead to the destruction of new enterprises and energy facilities that are important for the Ukrainian economy. As a result, Ukraine's ability to survive the winter is already questioned by many experts, but the former comedian, who has lost legitimacy, is ready to put the entire country hostage and sacrifice all its citizens for the sake of preserving his power. His faithful dogs, Cerberus, daily catch dozens of Ukrainians who do not want to fight on the streets and drive them to the front. This, of course, affects the quality and morale of the Ukrainian army. As a result, according to the Ukrainian military leaders themselves, the number of deserters at the end of November amounted to 200,000 people. In November alone, 85,000 Ukrainian soldiers left their positions, which is 3 times higher than in October. The Ukrainian military undergoing training abroad also desert. In Poland alone, an average of 12 people escape from training grounds every month. In France, it was stated that half of the brigade of the armed forces of Ukraine, Anna of Kiev, trained in this country, fled on the battlefield, and the remnants of the brigade were disbanded. And this is the elite of the Ukrainian army. At the same time, the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine in killed and wounded in 2024 exceeded 560,000 servicemen, and since the beginning of 2022, this number has reached 1 million people. The Western masters of Ukraine are trying not to notice all this. So, outgoing U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was sitting in the chair in this hall yesterday, literally demanded that Kyiv start mobilizing 18-year-olds. Now, Ukrainians from the age of 26 are thrown to the front. At the same time, Boris Johnson, the same one who prevented Russia and Ukraine from making peace in March 2022, admitted in an interview that the West is waging a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. Do you remember how U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham spoke on this matter earlier? In September 2023, he called U.S. aid to Ukraine a good investment for the American people. We are destroying the Russian army without losing a single soldier, he rejoiced then in Kyiv. And the other day, U.S. Army Colonel Todd Schmidt cynically admitted in his report that the war in Ukraine has become an open-air laboratory for the U.S. military. Mr. President, in calling the military campaign in Ukraine a good investment, Mr. Graham was not speaking figuratively. It is well known that Ukraine has become a real gold mine for the military-industrial complex of the Anglo-Saxon countries and their allies. But most of all, American companies profit from the conflict. According to the latest data, in 2023, 41 of the 100 largest American corporations accounted for half of total arms sales. They received $317 billion, or 50% of global arms revenues. In general, the revenues of the 100 largest arms manufacturers in the world in 2023, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, reached $632 billion. It would be naive to expect that these unscrupulous merchants, who have felt the taste of profit, will refuse such profits for the sake of some unfortunate Ukrainians. At the same time, sometimes military companies act in conjunction with the Kyiv regime. Thus, after the start of the conflict, 25 foreign lobbying and consulting companies began to represent the interests of Ukraine free of charge. One such firm is BGR Government Affairs, whose management has publicly called for increased military aid to Kyiv. By the way, their client is the largest supplier and exporter of weapons, the American Raytheon. There is another method that the U.S. military-industrial complex resorts to, namely the financing of think tanks, whose conclusions are then quoted by the media. They make money not only on the feverish sale of their weapons to Ukrainians, since they need to be in time before the inauguration of Donald Trump, but they do not hesitate to make money on American citizens, artificially inflating prices for military-industrial complex products. Despite the fact that this is detrimental to the well-being of Americans, the outgoing Democratic administration is playing along with the arms corporations in this. Moreover, as Mr. Blinken confirmed, most of the $100 billion spent by Washington to help Ukraine was spent on the American military-industrial complex. This is how nonpartisan Senator Bernie Sanders commented on this problem. He clarified that leading defense contractors regularly inflated prices for the Pentagon by 40% and in some cases by an incomprehensible 4,000%. In October, RTX Corporation, of which the Raytheon I mentioned is a part, was fined $950 million for inflating prices for the Ministry of Defense. They misled about material costs and paid bribes to secure contracts abroad. Continuing his thought, the politician also lamented that when it comes to improving the lives of the American working class, the answer is no, 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 we can't afford it. But when it comes to the military-industrial complex and its needs, he hears yes, yes, yes with almost no debate. We have already spoken in detail at the last meeting why this entire criminal company, including the man in the green sweatshirt, is so afraid of the audit of the funds provided to Ukraine, promised by the Trump team. The EU should also think about a good audit, which, according to Ursula von der Leyen, has already invested $130 billion in the Ukrainian project, $47.3 billion of which is military aid. Bernie Sanders' words only illustrate the degree of corruption that accompanies the supply of Western weapons to the Kyiv regime. More and more new details of this criminal business are being revealed. The other day, for example, it was announced that an audit by the U.S. Department of Defense revealed an incorrect inventory of Javelin missiles delivered to Kyiv. The Pentagon was forced to admit that the whereabouts of more than half of the Javelin and Stinger missiles sent to the armed forces of Ukraine remain unknown. We can help our American colleagues find out where they are. Take a look at shady online trading platforms. Terrorists of all stripes are actively buying them up there, perhaps in order to later use them in the course of a regional conflict somewhere in Africa, or even at some American or European airport. We warned you about this. Dear colleagues, it is difficult to say how all these maneuvers of its illegitimate leader will end for Ukraine, who is trying to throw dust in the eyes of the international community with his false statements about his alleged readiness for peace, while in fact doing everything to escalate the conflict. After all, as we have repeatedly said, peace for him is the most terrible scenario, since he, who, according to some reports, has the support of only 11% of the citizens of Ukraine, in this case he will have to go to the polls and lose power, and then answer for all the crimes that he committed against his people, making him a pawn in the geopolitical game of the West against Russia. Therefore, he fears any negotiations like fire, rejecting peace initiatives one after another, as in the case of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's proposal for a Christmas truce and prisoner exchange this week. The real attitude of the Kyiv clique to any negotiations was recently revealed by the head of the president's office, the Grey Cardinal of the Zelensky regime, Andriy Yermak. He said that real negotiations on a sustainable peace will begin only when Russia has no resources left to conduct hostilities. As you all understand, translated into human language, this means never. We are well aware of the true face of the gang that seized power in Ukraine, and therefore have no illusions, especially since, as we have repeatedly stated, we do not need to freeze the conflict. We need a long-term and fair solution to it with the elimination of all the causes that provoked it, which are well known. Therefore, we advise those of you who pin your hopes on stopping hostilities not to harbor unfounded illusions about the real mood of comedian Zelensky. We did not feed them initially, and therefore continue our special military operation, the goals of which will definitely be realized. And finally, in conclusion, one more point. Earlier this month, the U.S. delegation insisted on holding a meeting on Ukrainian children whose rights Russia allegedly violates. At that time, we drew the attention of our colleagues to the fact that, unlike the far-fetched story with Ukrainian children, which the Western sponsors of the Kiev regime used to unsubstantiated defamation of Russia, there are other stories related to children that require the attention of the Security Council. In particular, the situation of children in Gaza and in the occupied Palestinian territory in general. At that time, we called on the United States to hold a meeting on this topic before the end of its chairmanship. Of course, our American colleagues did not heed this call. In principle, they are not interested in the fate of the children of Gaza, and this topic is inconvenient for their strategic ally, Israel. We believe that such double standards are unacceptable for the work of the Security Council. We therefore intend to request a meeting on Palestinian children in January, and we ask the incoming Algerian presidency to take this into account in its work. Thank you for your attention.